NFL free agency is right around the corner, and these are the best landing spots for the top guys this year. So yeah, free agency is right around the corner. Before we know it, it's gonna be here. So on today's video, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break down and discuss some of the best free agents in this year's free agency class, and where do I think the best landing spot would be for each and every one of them, because there are a ton of guys in this free agency class that can make a huge impact on different teams. But before I get into it, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. It'd be very much appreciated, and let me know who you want your team to add in this year's free agency, who would make a good impact on your team, and let's get into it. Now, I feel like a perfect guy to start off the video with would be talking about Kirk Cousins, the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. Last year, Kirk Cousins threw for 2,331 yards, 18 passing touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and a completion percentage of 69.5. Now, the people not knowing the context of this, you might be like, why are Kirk's stats so low? Those are horrible stats. Why is he even still in the league? Well, on October 29th versus the Green Bay Packers, he suffered an Achilles tear injury, which would put him out for the rest of the season. But Kirk, he was balling out. I'm gonna keep it honest with you guys. Before Kirk got hurt, he was honestly in the MVP race because he was putting up some pretty good stats at the time. Even though Kirk is coming off a season-ending injury, I mean, an Achilles injury isn't something to mess around about. There's still gonna be a huge market for him in free agency, and you know, all the QB needy teams are gonna be after Kirk Cousins, especially if the Vikings don't want to go ahead and re-sign him. And that's where I really think free agency is gonna get really interesting this offseason. Him and Justin Fields are gonna be two huge moves that really shake around the NFL, depending on what moves the Bears and Vikings make at the quarterback position. But in my opinion, I think the best landing spots for Kirk Cousins are pretty obvious. Of course, going back to the Minnesota Vikings, that'd be huge for the Vikings. Like I said, Kirk Cousins is such a reliable quarterback, but besides that, if the Atlanta Falcons aren't able to go ahead and trade for Justin Fields and the Bears either trade him somewhere else or keep him, do not be surprised if the Falcons try to go get Kirk Cousins, because they might be a playoff team with Kirk, I'm not gonna lie. Also, a team like the Denver Broncos, you already know they're trying to get rid of Russell Wilson, so I would not be surprised if the Broncos tried to go get Kirk. But honestly, in my opinion, I feel like the best landing spot for him would be Atlanta. Kirk Cousins, you know, he's not gonna have Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson anymore, but Atlanta has some weapons. They have Bijan, they have Drake London, they have Kyle Pitts. So he would be losing the best wide receiver in the NFL in my opinion, but he would still be having some great weapons in Atlanta. So like I said, Kirk Cousins, besides the Minnesota Vikings and him re-signing, the best landing spot for him in my opinion would be the Atlanta Falcons. Next up, I'm going to talk about two players at the same time since they're kind of similar, because honestly, if you really look at it, they're kind of in the same boat. They're both running backs. They both were just on one-year deals. They're now free agents, so a lot can happen with them. Saqoun Barkley last year had about 962 yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, and he missed about 3 games due to ankle injury. And Josh Jacobs had 805 yards with 6 rushing touchdowns. His stats were down last year. Well, he only played 1 week of football in December, didn't play at all in January. In the beginning of the year, he started off very, very slow. He did not have a 100-yard rushing game until November 12th versus the New York Jets. Now, the real question is, are teams going to really want to spend a lot of money on these guys? Because like I said, their stats weren't that good last year, but I think there's reasoning behind that. Both of the teams that these two players were on last year, the Raiders and the Giants, they simply weren't good football teams. Last year, Saquon had a great year, and then this year, Saquon's stats weren't that good, and the Giants were all around horrible this year. Daniel Jones tore his ACL, the O-line wasn't good. The Giants were not that playoff team that we saw a year ago. And the Raiders, Josh McDaniels at the beginning of the year, I truly believe is why the huge reason Josh Jacobs was so bad at the beginning of the year, because like I said, he was a horrible head coach. And he really just wasn't doing that good at the beginning of the year, and then Antonio Pierce came in and Jacobs started doing better. So I feel like there's still hope for both of these guys. I just feel like they were in tough situations. And the reason why I want to talk about both of them at the same time is because their ideal landing spots, honestly, they have the same spots. Because all the teams that need a running back would go ahead and try to go sign a guy like this, or they would go ahead and draft one. So these are the only places I could really see them signing. So of course, if the teams that they are on don't reel them back in with a new contract, these are the places that I think that could sign either Josh Jacobs or Saqoun Barkley. Number 1 would be the Houston Texans. The Texans already have a super electric offense. CJ Stroud, he's an amazing quarterback, an elite quarterback already in my opinion, and this offense is great. But the one thing it doesn't have is an electric running back. Last year they had Devin Singletary. He did pretty good, but like maybe they want something like a Saqoun Barkley or a Josh Jacobs, a workhorse back that could be super electric in this offense and take the load off of CJ Stroud a little bit. I feel like either of those guys would be a great fit in Houston to play alongside CJ Stroud. So yeah, I think the ideal spot for either of those guys would be Houston, or the Los Angeles Chargers could also be something. Austin Eckler, he's getting old. He's also also a free agent. I do not think he's going to be the running back for the Chargers next year, so maybe you could go ahead and see them pick up a running back in free agency, but I don't know. I got a feeling Jim Harbaugh is going to have to cook something in the draft for one of his former Michigan running backs. I just got that feeling, but Josh Jacobs and Saquon, ideal landing spot, Houston Texans. Next up, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneer wide receiver Mike Evans. Now, this guy last year had an amazing season for the Buccaneers. Mike Evans had 79 receptions, 1,255 yards, and 13 receiving touchdowns. He was balling out with Baker Mayfield. It should be the Buccaneers' #1 priority, or at least #2 priority, because they also got to bring back Antoine Winfield Jr., but to bring back Mike Evans. But if somehow, some way they aren't able to and Mike Evans becomes a free agent, the Kansas City Chiefs should try to do everything they can to go ahead and go get him. I feel like that would just be an amazing landing spot, or just the best landing spot for him. We saw what he could do with Baker Mayfield. No disrespect to Baker Mayfield or anything. He had an insane bounce back year. But man, Mike Evans and Patrick Mahomes, that just sounds ridiculous. And the offense that we would get out of Kansas City with Andy Reid, Mahomes, and Mike Evans would be honestly ridiculous in my opinion. If somehow, some way the Kansas City Chiefs can go ahead and get him, I feel like that'd be the best landing spot. Or I could also end up maybe seeing him go to Carolina if the Panthers like really want him, because they're desperate for a playmaker. But in my opinion, Kansas City Chiefs would be the best landing spot for Mike Evans if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers don't bring him back. Next up, I got T. Higgins. This really isn't going to be a super long segment because I truly believe that the Cincinnati Bengals aren't going to let him go. I'm pretty certain that they're going to go ahead and franchise tag him this offseason. But if somehow the Bengals were to let him go and let him test free agency, I feel like the Carolina Panthers will go ahead and sign him. They need some talent at that wide receiver position, and I feel like that'd be a nice spot. Also, T. Higgins has been dealing with a lot of injuries recently, so who really knows when Cincinnati's going to do. But I truly believe that he's going to get tagged this offseason. Next up, we have Antoine Winfield Jr. Now, this guy made All-Pro last year, so if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers let him go, a lot of people are going to want him because he balled out. Like I said, last year he had an all-around great season for being a safety in the NFL. He had some great stats, 6 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, 3 interceptions, 4 fumble recoveries. He was balling out. And he is a key piece on this Tampa Bay defense. If for some reason they aren't able to work out a deal, there are some teams that are going to want him. A huge team I can see wanting him would be the Los Angeles Rams. They need some help on that secondary because last year and during the regular season last year, that secondary was getting cooked. And they have some very unserious defensive backs in that room in Los Angeles. They definitely need some help, and as well as the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts also need a little bit of help at safety, so adding an all-pro guy would be huge for them. But honestly, I feel like the ideal landing spot for him would be the Los Angeles Rams if Tampa cannot work out a deal. Next up, we got Chris Jones of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, this one can get very interesting this offseason. Chris Jones is one of the best defensive players in the NFL, and he needs a new contract from the Kansas City Chiefs. But here's the thing with the Chiefs. They have some things they got to work out this offseason. They got to work out something with Chris Jones, and they got to work out something with L'jarius Sneed, and they only have one franchise tag, so things could get very interesting. If for some reason they ain't able to work out a long-term deal with either Sneed or Chris Jones and one of them gets left out, well, in this situation, I'm going to say they can't re-sign Chris Jones. What would be the best landing spot? I feel like Detroit would be a great spot for him. Having Aiden Hutchinson and Chris Jones on that defense would be an all-around great thing for them. Even the Las Vegas Raiders are probably going to go ahead and try to go get him, but when it's all said and done, Chris Jones wants to remain in Kansas City, and I don't know. If something does happen, he does become a free agent, things could definitely get shaken up, and I would love to see him in Detroit. But as of right now, I feel like he's just going to end up getting tagged, or they're going to somehow work out a deal, because I wouldn't be surprised if he went ahead and took a pay cut to stay in Kansas City, since he loves the city so much, and they just keep winning championships. So Chris Jones, I would love to see him in Detroit with Aiden Hutchinson, but sadly, I think he's going to end up staying in Kansas City. It's time to talk about Justin Madubuike, and I'm a Raven fan, so I'm kind of excited, but also not excited to talk about this one. You guys should know that Justin Madubuike is one of the top interior linemen in the NFL currently. He had an insane season this year. Defensive tackles are getting paid a lot of money, so now it's time for Justin Madubuike to get paid after last year's 13 sack season and 56 tackles. He is truly a game record for this Baltimore Raven defense, but the Baltimore Ravens do not have a ton of money, I'm not gonna lie. And in order to keep this whole defensive squad together, we're gonna have to pay him, and we're gonna have to do something about Patrick Queen as well. So if for some reason the Ravens don't tag him or they don't get a deal done and they just let him walk for nothing for some reason, which I would be so upset if it happened, but somehow if it did happen, teams that happen to need a defensive interior lineman would be the Indianapolis Colts. Like I said, they need to beef up that defense defense, like I said with Winfield earlier. The Las Vegas Raiders could also use some help on that defensive department, especially in the defensive interior section. That Raiders defense probably just needs some more key players on it. And if the Bengals were somehow able to get a deal done with him, I'd be the angriest man in the world, because they also need some help in that defensive interior side. But I don't know if they really got money to spend this offseason. They got to pay Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. They don't have a ton of money in the world, and they got to spend a ton of money. But I truly believe the Baltimore Ravens will be keeping Justin Madubuike this offseason. But if for some reason they don't, I guarantee you there's going to be a huge market for him, because like I said, he's an all-around game wrecker. Next up, we have L'jarius Sneed. Now, he is a key piece to this Kansas City Chiefs defense, but like I said earlier when I was talking about Chris Jones, Chiefs are really going to have to decide what they're going to be able to do with L'jarius Sneed and Chris Jones, because I don't think they're going to be able to pay both of them a ton of money. Sneed last year allowed only 42 catches on 81 targets for 406 yards, and he allowed 0 touchdowns and got 2 interceptions and had 10 pass breakups. He had an outstanding year for a defensive back, and he's going to really want a payday. So if the Kansas City Chiefs, like I said, aren't going to be able to pay him, I can think of a ton of teams that are going to need corners. The Chicago Bears could potentially be one if Jaylon Johnson doesn't want to be there anymore. The Las Vegas Raiders need some help in that defensive back room. The Indianapolis Colts, they need help on that secondary. Also the Los Angeles Rams. Out of all of these though, I feel like the best landing spot would be Indianapolis, because I feel like out of all these teams, they need the most help with the defensive back room, and I feel like they'd have the most amount of money to be able to spend on him as well. But L'jarius Sneed, in my opinion, ideal landing spot would be Indy, because they need help in that defensive back room, and I think they got the most money besides the Bears. Next up, we have Jaylon Johnson of the Chicago Bears, another cornerback. Last year, he really had a breakout season, and he requested a trade. That's how good he was playing. He wanted to get out of Chicago. He was selected to the Pro Bowl, and he was second team All-Pro as well. So you already know this man that man had some elite play last year. Now, the real question is, with him requesting a trade last year, is he going to want to go back to Chicago if they're able to pay him a lot of money? And even if the Bears don't want to pay him a ton of money and they want to go ahead and wait to see if he can do this elite year once again, they might go ahead and franchise tag him. But like I said, if that doesn't happen, ideal landing spots could be Houston. They have a ton of money to spend, and I feel like Jaylon Johnson would be huge to add to that defensive back room. Even though they already have a ton of great ones, if they want to go ahead and spend some money on the defense, Jaylon Johnson would be great. Like I said earlier, Indianapolis, they need help in that defensive back room. Even Las Vegas just needs a whole new defense besides Max Crosby. Really, I know the defense played well towards the end of the year, but they need some more playmakers on that defense if they want to make it an elite defense, and I feel like Antonio Pierce would be down for that. Either Las Vegas or Houston, because they have a ton of money they can spend. So I feel like the ideal landing spots would either be Houston, because they have a ton of money to spend, or Las Vegas, because Antonio Pierce wants some more playmakers on that defensive side of the football. But yeah, that's going to be all the guys that I want to break down on today's video. If you guys want me to break down more free agents or where I think the ideal landing spot would be, let me know in the comments, because I'm trying to keep this video a little bit short. I'm not trying to have this video be 25 minutes long, me breaking down over 25 guys and what I think the ideal landing spots for each of them would be. But yeah, in the comments, let me know what you guys thought about the video and some of the ideal landing spots that I picked, and I will see you guys in the next one.